I'm the Director of Strategic Foresight here at KnowledgeWorks. And before we begin, I just want to express my gratitude for you all to spend a little bit of your day with us today. It certainly means a lot. These conversations would not have a lot of meaning if we didn't have you to listen in on it. So I will be your host for the duration today. This series is a series we've been referring to here at KnowledgeWorks as a state transformation series. And it really is designed for us to have discussions with folks that are really thinking deeply both about the futures of learning in their community, but more importantly, they're taking steps to really make that future a reality. Today's guest, I'm thrilled to introduce, is my friend and colleague, David Cook from the Kentucky Department of Education. And before we jump in, for those of you who may not be familiar with KnowledgeWorks, KnowledgeWorks is a national nonprofit. We're headquartered in Cincinnati, Ohio, and we work all throughout the country. We deeply believe in creating the future of learning together, and we do that through really various diverse skill sets across a wide range of teams. This includes policy and advocacy. It includes work in schools to build technical capacity around personalized competency-based learning. It involves my team, who specialize in thinking about long-term horizons for futures for learning, as well as colleagues who are very deep in the data analysis and research aspect of the work. So without further ado, David, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, because you have, I think, one of the coolest titles for somebody representing a state Department of Education.
Yeah, I'm David Cook. I am the Director of Innovative Learning for the Kentucky Department of Education. I have been in that role for about 12 years. We were one of the first two, Colorado being the other state, to actually create units at our state agency around innovation and innovative learning. So now pretty much most of the states have one at some level, be it small or large. They have a unit. It could be called personalized learning. It could be called a bunch of other things, but we're all kind of in the same boat, and we're all friends across consortiums of states. So yeah, that's been my role the last 12 years at the Department of Education.
Excellent. So, you know, the topic or the title of this conversation was Innovation One Step at a Time. And we were really thrilled that you agreed to the conversation because of the unique makeup of Kentucky. So you all have urban centers all the way out to rural communities in Appalachia. You know, being in Pittsburgh, we like to think of ourselves as the gateway to Appalachia. So I see you as being a neighbor. So with this idea of innovating one step at a time, and really, you know, as part of your introduction, you said that you were among the first to really have this title. Can you give us a sense of what Kentucky has been doing to both innovate and really through thinking about the future, right? So how are you positioning this idea of a vision in what you do? And I guess what I'm asking is, can you share a little bit about the history of innovation in Kentucky at a 30,000-foot level?
Yeah, sure, Jason. As I said, we've formally been doing it since 2010. Our then Commissioner of Education, Terry Holliday, when he got to the Department of Education, I was working at the time on our Race to the Top application. So that was I was project manager for all of that. And we got finished with that, of course, turned in the application, and he came to my office and he said, "What are you going to do now?" And I said, "I'm not really sure." I said, what do you want me to do now, right? And he said, "Well, I have this idea about a unit that would, for lack of a better way of describing it, be our R&D arm at the department that would help and watch and support districts in creating new and innovative approaches to learning," which was exact, I mean, that's where my heart had been actually for a little while. And we did a little bit of that in our Race to the Top application, but as you know, there's a lot of constraints in that monstrous grant. So it wasn't like it was big innovation. But so we got to work almost right away with both some statutory things that came along and also some things that we wanted to help. We already knew districts that were doing things, but I'm going to really quickly share my screen. I'm probably just going to show this one slide.
Sure.
If I can. Okay, there it is. So, all right, come on, there we go. So I just want to show you, this is our journey slide. This is what Jason was just asking me about. And it goes back way before when I just described to you, which was 2010. I think the first thing that we did, which was pretty significant at the time, was in 1997, we enacted a performance-based credit law. So we actually had, much before a lot of people did, our first foray into non-seat time conversations. So we really were thinking about, what does it mean if a kid can demonstrate mastery of concepts and do it in 5 weeks, if that were happened to be the case. So that was our first primary effort. And then in 2010, the Commissioner Holliday created our unit, and almost immediately, because at the time, CCSSO, the Council of Chief State School Officers, had created its innovation lab network at the network level, at the CCSSO level, and Kentucky was a founding member of that network. There were 6 of us at the time, 6 states. So we created our local Kentucky-based innovation lab network with about 8 districts at the time. And almost at the same time, Dr. Holliday, I don't think there's too many states on from your state or mine, Jason, but those Appalachian states have a little bit of a problem because they're not designed for snow, but they get snow. And we had this thing going on, which I think a lot of states were dealing with, where particularly in our Eastern Kentucky counties in the mountains, they were missing 40 days of instruction a year. And that's not good. And the legislature's answer to that on regular occasion was, well, we'll just cancel the days. So a school year that's supposed to be 180 days ended up being 140 days. Well, that's not good for kids, obviously. So Dr. Holliday wasn't real happy about that. So he went to the legislature and he says, I have an idea. I want to create a remote learning program so that schools in Eastern Kentucky in particular don't have to close when they're shut down for snow. They can't get to the buildings. We want to, well, obviously in 2010, that was a really great idea, but infrastructure wise, we probably weren't prepared for it, but we went on and did it. We started with just a couple of districts helping us pilot it. And by 2020, when some little thing happened in March of 2020, we had 83, half of our school districts were doing remote learning already, which was obviously very beneficial in that situation of the pandemic. So by that time, our state had really pushed out a lot of work on infrastructure. We had pretty much the whole state wired, at least. Still had issues with people not having the affordability issue because they couldn't afford the internet, but they had a plug in their house. They could stick a computer in the wall at that time. So that was a big thing for us, and it really helped us as we dove into that pandemic situation to have that already in place. Had a lot of districts that could mentor other districts in the best ways, best practices. Then in 2013, we became, I think, the first state to have a statewide innovation zone piece of legislation, the Districts of Innovation Bill. There were a couple maybe that were school related, but this was for entire districts. And that started in 2013, and we had some success with that for several years. Then in 2017, to jump on the bandwagon of a lot of other states, we began our work in competency-based education. We took a little bit different train or attacked or did it a little differently than some other states, in that we focused on what most people now come to call the profile of a graduate competencies rather than the academic competencies. Because we felt it was a little bit better way to start. It was a little bit better way to get the notion of measuring competencies before we had to tackle the ideas of what is a competency on the academic side? Are you talking about literacy, like a bunch of different standards put together, or what are you talking about? So 2017, we embarked on that work. So we were creating, without calling it a profile of a graduate, we were creating state level competencies for those things that were in everybody's profile anyway: collaborator, critical thinker, communicator, those things. And we took it another step further. Over the course of time, about 2019, we began developing the actual performance outcomes, the measures for those competencies. And we did it at grade span levels. So we did it at second grade, fifth grade, eighth grade, and 12th grade. So you could look at this document that we had, these rubrics that we had, and see what a second grader should be able to do in the area of collaboration, for instance. So a teacher would have something that they could observe and sort of mark their progress on those things. And then again, 2020 happens. We were all set to really take the next step, which was to begin to talk about academic competencies and start to build those same kinds of performance outcomes for those things when the pandemic hit. In 2019, another big step, which hasn't gotten as much attention, but has all kinds of implications for personalized and competency-based education, we modified our graduation requirements. And the primary way that we did that was we took the 4 years of high school and we split them in half. So freshman, sophomore years were very standardized, as they are in every state. So every kid had a math class, an English class, and a social studies class, and a science class. But we took the second 2 years and we said, while you still have the state minimum requirements for those content areas, we're off the table when it comes to what those courses are. So if a student is headed down a particular career path, for instance, then if that student's math requirements are not Algebra 2 and other things like that, then let's put the right math requirements in there and they get the credits the way they should. Same with science. And English is a great example because we have career pathways, particularly medically based career pathways, where English is a very different conversation because it's about medical transcription. It's about understanding medical terminology and reading medical stuff. Well, we were having kids that were having to take actually 6 English credits because they had to do the 4 that we required, plus 2 additional that the pathway required. So we said, well, why are we doing that? Why didn't the second 2 be the 2 they need for their pathway? So that's another piece. And we're now starting to see the really next evolutionary future thing that you're talking about, Jason, which is, what does it look like if we think differently about the credentialing of learning? And that conversation started because we changed the graduation requirements. Because we changed them, but as state agencies do so often, we changed them. We didn't really have a real good plan for how to help folks rethink. I mean, what does that mean to a school and a school district, and a high school in particular? So people weren't really using the new graduation requirements. They were making their schedules out a little differently, but they weren't really going, oh, wait a minute, we could add this course, or we could do this because kids want this. This is what they really want. And they had empty sections of courses that kids didn't want anymore, and they weren't quickly making the transition to a new way of thinking. So now we're into a process where we've just begun an initiative around micro-credentialing, and we're starting with Algebra 1, course by course. We're trying to take it, so it's a math process at first, where we're going to look at subdividing that course into sections or units, just like a teacher would do in a classroom, and credentialing the learning in those sections, thereby doing a lot of things like, well, if a kid doesn't do well in a section, let's just have them relook at that section and not send them back to the beginning to start over again like we normally do when they don't do well in a course. We make them take the whole course over again. So that's a new process. It's really exciting that we're working on right now with XQ, and with we have a Center for Mathematics in Kentucky that's helping us identify schools and districts. So we're really excited about that work. And then, which I think is really why you asked me to come today, Jason, last spring, the spring of 2021, we embarked on a rather large initiative in Kentucky, which is changing truly from the bottom up the way we think about planning for big initiatives and transforming education. And it's at the heart of that I think is what's important, and that is this reciprocal idea of designing learning, assessment, accountability systems, that you don't do it at the state level and then toss it down to local communities, that you look at local communities and you ask local communities, what is it that you think we need to do differently than we do now in all aspects of our education system? We haven't done that I don't know if any of the states on the call have. We haven't done that in Kentucky really ever. We say we have, but we haven't really. But this time, and you mentioned it at the top of the hour, Jason, this time we started by having the commissioner go all over the state and asking people a couple of questions. What was the education system like for you? And if you had to go back and do it again, or if you have children or grandchildren or other children in the system, what do you think needs to be different about the way that it would be in the future? So I felt like we were doing a little bit of a KnowledgeWorks forecasting kind of thing. So, what we did was we took all of those thousands of responses from stakeholders, students, parents, community members, politicians, and we put them together in a report. Well, the first thing we did was we took a really radically inclusive design process, and we developed a statewide coalition of 60 people. I think I can probably move on here and I'll show you that stuff. Oop, there we go. So the Kentucky Coalition for Advancing Education was our way of taking all of that information from those communities and developing in essence, a report, which you mentioned, that told us this is where we are, this is where everybody says we need to go, and then the work we're doing now is that stuff in the middle. How do we get from here to there? And that, for a forecaster, I think is probably pretty exciting. So, but what was cool, really cool about that process of determining the membership of that coalition was that we did it in a radically inclusive way that we've never done before. We divided that 60 people into thirds. The State Department of Education picked a third of those people. And of course, what we did was we picked critical stakeholders like legislators, superintendents of schools, those kind of folks, people that we knew had a voice that needed to be heard. We took a third of that recruitment and it was open. We just did an application process to the entire state. Any citizen of the state could apply to be a member of the coalition. So what we got there, of course, was the 20 or 30 people, the 20 people that always raised their hand. And then finally, we got the community recruitment, where we went out and asked civil rights organizations in particular, give us the name, the one name that you think never gets heard, needs to be heard. And we got another 20 that way. So that was the creation of the coalition. What was exciting about that, I'm gonna stop sharing. What was exciting about that, Jason, was the makeup of that coalition was 3 times more diverse than the population of the state.
That's amazing.
So where we have about 6 to 8% of our state for instance, it's African American, about 20% of that coalition was African American. So we just did I think a really good job. So that group took all that data and wrote what you described a minute ago. I'm probably not going to be able to do it. There we go.
Oh, there you go.
The United We Learn report. I'll stick the, oh, you got it. Okay, good.
Yeah, I think Sean's on it.
Good, thank you, Sean.
For the folks out there, I want to urge you all to read this paper because it's beautiful, and it's beautiful for the exact reasons you've outlined, and that this is a radically different approach to thinking about vision, especially from a state education agency. And David, we've had the good fortune of knowing each other for a while and having a previous conversation about this paper. So one of the most interesting things you said to me in terms of, we'll say, implications of that process is an emerging, or we'll say a fairly different narrative for how the department sees themselves. And I was hoping that you could maybe describe that to the folks listening. And for the folks joining us too, please, there's a Q&A tab. So as you think of questions for David, don't be shy. We do plan to do a question and answer segment for our last 15 minutes. So David, I'll kick it back to you.
Yeah, so when we started this work, I think as it evolved, I got really excited. And I think my teammates at KDE got really excited because, and this is not the right phrase, Jason, but this idea of a bottom-up approach to redesign is what makes this so radically different. It's the notion that what our role has to become as a state agency is supporting the change that local communities want to make. So a big chunk of what we probably are going to come out of with this, and this will be probably our little fight with the feds, is a lot more of our accountability systems in our state have to be locally based. They have to be about what community A finds important for their kids to be held accountable for. We had this great conversation with the coalition as we were designing this report about, first of all, what is accountability, but in specifically, where does accountability need to live? And obviously we have these things that we have to be held, the feds say we have to be held accountable for, which are mostly quantitative academic measures. But these folks are really excited about talking about qualitative measures, about inputs, about what are the kids getting in order to get to those outcomes. So, which we don't talk a lot about. But at the heart of all of it was starting with, so what did we do, Jason? We took that coalition concept. We took this report, which I love it as much as you do. I love to just open it and say, there's 10 themes in there, which are basically the future ideas that all these people had. We want an assessment system that does this. We want communities that look like this. We want this, all of this. And we took that whole concept and brought it down to the local level. And we said, all right, you form a local coalition at your community level with the same radically inclusive design concept that we just described, those 60 people. And you start to think about what it is that your community thinks is important. And you wouldn't be surprised to know that in Jefferson County, our largest district in Louisville, with 100,000 students, has a very different set of what they want kids to be held accountable for than the folks in Johnson County in Eastern Kentucky, in the mountains of Appalachia. Very different needs, everything's different. There's a huge amount of poverty in both of those places, but it's different poverty, obviously, because there's different reasons for it and all kinds of different things. We don't have time to go into that, but the point is for me, the things that make it different are that reciprocity, that notion that what we're charged to do at the state is to listen and to say, okay, let's see if we can do that. So it's first the kind of that yes and mentality. So instead of saying you can't do that, The law won't let you do that. Well, if enough of you say that we want to do this, let's see if we can make that happen. Which is why one of the critical things that we've really tried hard to instill in these folks as they establish their local coalitions, as well as when we establish the state one, is your public officials have to be on your coalition. We didn't try to, we were very good at not saying, put this person on your coalition, but we said, you got to get those folks at the table, because I don't want to turn around to try to make policy recommendations at the state legislature 3 years from now and have them all look at me like, I don't know what this work is. What are you talking about?
Exactly.
They have to be involved from the very beginning, so they understand that this is Kentucky citizens writing this report, not KDE, not the State Board of Education, Kentucky citizens saying, this is what we need. Well, I'm pretty sure if Kentucky citizens say that, Mr. Senator or Representative, you're going to listen to that, because that's who votes for you. So I'm excited about that part of it. But ultimately, Jason, to answer your question, it's the locally driven. It's co-designed by KDE rather than KDE designing it and bringing it back. It's their design. We're just figuring out how to make it happen.
So that's a pretty big shift then, right? So
absolutely,
I think a lot of times we're conditioned to seeing agencies as being like the mechanism for compliance, where you're really shifting things. You're a catalyst now, and a catalyst for change. The groundwork is there, right? So now it's just to build upon it. So going back to that paper, and we've had the good fortune. So as somebody that has the privilege of working as a professional futurist, vision, all right, that is my favorite thing to think about. We're not often asked what we want for the future. And when we are, it's a very hard question to answer, because, well, typically we know what we don't want, right? Usually we don't want more uncertainty. We don't want more grief. But you've got such a rich picture of citizens all across Kentucky answering this question with some fidelity and some rigor. So as you reflect on that process, what have been some key insights and surprises in terms of output?
Yeah. So number one, and this is not, it doesn't surprise me. I think it surprised some people at the agency at the amazing level of knowledge and understanding and vision our students have.
100%.
100%. Don't, I mean, we say, yeah, we need to listen more to the students, but we do it to a certain degree, but these kids are amazing. And I'm not talking, one of the great things about, and we didn't do anything with this, one of the great things about the identification of students on these local coalitions and on the state coalition was we didn't go, nobody went out and said, bring us your student body president, bring us your, they said, bring us the kids who you know, think about and know, have vision for what need, they can look at you. And that's what I love about them. These kids that are on these local coalitions, because each of us at the state level sort of get to be a team member on one community's coalition. So my group in Logan County, Kentucky, Russellville, Kentucky, salute to Logan County, which is in our southern part, southwestern part of our state. Those kids are just saying, this is what's wrong with my learning experience. And it's exactly what's in this report, Jason, that you pointed out. I knew you'd really love it, because every one of, so there's these 10 themes, and every one of the 10 themes, sort of the future look, begins with the words, we envision a future. So to surprise to some people, the other surprise was because of the way we had radically included people, and we got these voices we had never heard before. We got a lot of non-English speaking parents who we made sure translators were available at these meetings. So they actually had a voice. They didn't just come and sit there and we could say, check, they were here. we got voices that were never heard before who talked to us about their situation and the world in which we lived. And the part that you don't see as much in the report, but it was a big part of how we came to these themes, is one of the things the coalition did was they in essence created student user profiles. They took all of that information, and you see, 10 different students that have different needs, different characteristics. And we got those local coalitions to start saying, do you see this kid in your district? Do you see this kid in your district? So those were the exciting things to me, but ultimately it has been the difference, so you and I have been around these kinds of conversations for a while. And when I've gone to board meetings or I've gone to community forums in the past, it's a couple of people talking. It's the district kind of guiding and leading the conversation. And that's not what I hear here. The reason being is in the leadership of these local coalitions, and this was very important to us as well, we required the district to have a district person and a community co-lead. So it's a co-lead situation in every one of these communities. So there is whether that person be a member of the business community, the Chamber of Commerce, a local government leader, somebody that's an influencer in that community that brings the community to the table and helps them understand the work. And I think that's been powerful to me too. But I'm just been really, I shouldn't have been, but I've been surprised in some of the levels, the depth of the conversation folks are having once they really allow themselves. And that's the big thing, Jason. We're the state, and you just pointed it out. They're waiting, many of them are waiting for the shoe to drop and us to say, all right, that's as far as the fun goes. Now you're going to have to do it the way we want you to do it. And so far, no. Dr. Glass has said, this is about creating the vision, the future that we want and that you see in this report. I mean, it's a whole lot easier to do that as a state agency person. If I walk around like with my Bible in my hand, it's a lot easier for me to say, if somebody says, well, I don't like that you're doing that, or why are you doing that? Well, we're doing it because the citizens of the state told us to do it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And I mean, fundamentally as adults too. So I'll back this up 1 second. So a colleague of mine once said that every adult needs a teenager as an advisor. And I firmly believe that for all the reasons you articulated with vision. Young people lack the filter that we sometimes put on as adults. But, I think zooming out a bit, no matter what, but I think this is especially true within education, young people are the end user. They have very little power to make decisions for how the system behaves. So we have to look at ourselves not as decision makers for them, but for advocates on their behalf to make changes, to humanize this system so that it works better for them. It is our collective bet on all of our futures that these systems work well. So you all have been at it, right? You've done the visioning work. The grad requirements, you started to ramp up the competency-based learning piece. You've got the digital infrastructure in place. What else is coming down the pipe? Like, what else is next?
Well, a couple of things that are kind of coming out of this, and I mentioned the profile of a graduate before. Our State Board of Education, like South Carolina, Virginia, a couple of other states, is looking at what I would refer to as a state set of guidelines. I don't think we're going to get all the way to this. You have to word for word do these competencies. We're going to have generically say, we think that these 5 areas are things that kids need, and so you need to do something that aligns to those, even if it's not exactly the same. But inside that conversation with these local, so we didn't really name them yet, but the local laboratories of learning, which are the on the ground local coalitions that are doing the work, they're actually prototyping and testing new ideas. Many of them, the first round of those prototypings have been around the profile, particularly how do we both report and collect information and data on, so sort of the platform on which a profile would live,
Okay.
the dashboard on which a profile would live. So yes, we know that these are the things we want to measure, and maybe even we have the performance outcomes that I mentioned to measure them, but we also have to have a place so that every student carries around with them this thing that says, yes, I've mastered these competencies.
Hmm.
And so one of the cool things that's going on is that's happening. We have one of our districts, the one I mentioned a moment ago, that's developing the dashboard. They actually have brought in a tech person to help them with the development of the application to do that, and with a testing group of students. So that's exciting. We are, Kentucky is applying for the competitive grant for assessment with the federal government.
Hmm.
And we're really, so if you want to know what the big the big hope, the big thing that we're holding out there to say, this is the thing that if we really did everything we want to do, this is it, is to be able to take these local systems that I'm talking about, these local accountability structures that these community coalitions are creating,
Hmm.
and figure out how that exists alongside of the state and federal requirements that my state and every other state has, because that's what nobody's done yet. We can play in the sandbox of local accountability and performance assessments and doing things differently at the local level. But at some point in the day, you have to, the local district system has to say, yeah, but we still have to take the accountability, the summative assessment, and we still have to do these things.
Hmm.
We want to have the conversation we want to have with the feds and with our state is, let's figure out what we can do to tie it all together so that you feds get what you need, but locals get what they need. And just as important, that locals don't lose things that are valuable to them locally, that if we simply just took the local assessment and accountability conversations and dumped them into the state and said, we need to assess this thing over here that local A is doing, then local A loses a whole lot of stuff, because then it becomes a number again that somebody's measuring. So we have to figure out how the balance goes on, how do we allow those locals to do the things they think are most important to them and show that as a viable method of accountability, and still manage to do the things. That's a hard one, right? Because
Yeah.
it's like, we all say we want to have personalized competency-based education, and we have to keep these state level and federal level account. Can you
Which,
really do that?
yeah,
Yeah, I think you can. I think theoretically and to some sense practically you can, but it's really going to be hard to balance those things when you're talking about individual kids. It's really hard.
and I think that that's such a high value lever of change, the accountability and assessment piece. I mean, to try to get accurate measures around fidelity of implementation and outcomes around, to your point, something that's personalized, yet you're using an accountability structure that was not intended for this in any
Mhm.
way. It's the ultimate square peg in a round hole at best, right?
Right.
So,
So one of the things that we're thinking about is, one of the things we don't measure and we don't do a good job of is all of the inputs that, in other words, how does a school do the things that it does? Do they do things aligned to what they're trying to, are their inputs and outcomes aligned? So in other
mhm,
words, the idea that we don't measure very well that school A has exactly the right programs for the students that it has, and thus gets really high outcomes because they've aligned all that and made it work for them. We
mhm,
don't really measure those qualitative things that tell me. And the great example is, We did a thing with our, and I noticed there was a question in the chat. We did a thing with our career and tech folks, thinking about local accountability. And one of the questions we asked was, are you actually providing the pathways that your students are asking for? And the surprising result was a lot of people weren't. They were still running a welding program because 10 years ago they had 150 welding students, and now they only have 10. And they got 140 kids who want to do some kind of robotics or other technology-based thing, and they don't have that pathway. So the question I saw in the chat was, how are rural places working on that? Fortunately, we have a lot of regional career and tech centers particularly in our rural communities. So we're able to combine forces, if you will, amongst communities and districts to get all the things that everybody needs together like that. I think we're very cognizant, though, of helping those districts who are rural to really hone in and say, are they really lining up what they need with what's available? So anyway, I hope I in part answered the question that I saw in the chat. And there's another one.
So this was from the anonymous attendee. I'd be interested in seeing what career pathways are available.
Yeah.
So thank you for the question. So my question for you, and it'll be my last question, and I want to keep this as an invitation for folks to continue to submit their questions, is on a personal side of things. So we do this work because we believe we can affect change and create a brighter, humane future. And certainly the document lays out, I think, a beautiful vision for the future. But David, I'm curious to know, what's your personal vision for the future of education?
My vision, Jason, is a future in which when I talk to people about what's going on in their school, that I'm hearing about a culture in which every student is being the child that they were intended to, that they're all of their aspirations, all of their strengths, all of their gifts, their talents, whatever you want to call that, is being recognized, and thus aligning all of the work that student does to that. So when you walk into a school that I want to see in the future, every kid is engaged. Now, it's loud, it's chaotic, it's a bunch of places where 4 kids are sitting in the floor working on a project together. I don't want to see a lot of 5-row, 5-desk classrooms, because I don't think that makes any sense with the world in which, and I see a place that looks like the place that kids are going after they leave school. So in order to do that, in order to have a more equitable, a more learner-centered environment, we really have to understand better who kids are. And I don't mean that in the big psychological sense, like, studying them through a textbook. I mean, who is every child? I'll tell you this, single-handedly, and I haven't done it in a research project yet, but if I anecdotally took every comment from a superintendent that I've had in the last 6 months, the number one thing they will tell me is, and one of them, I think, is Danny's on the call today. One of them is, it surprised me how little my teachers knew about my students when the pandemic hit. And I don't mean they knew their grades, they knew their homework, whether they were behind in things. Do you know where the kid woke up this morning? Do you know what their talent, what they really are gifted at? Did you know that they played this sport? Did you know, whatever their home situation is, whatever they might perceive in terms of being disadvantaged in whatever way, they just didn't know it. And the superintendents were like amazed that was, and that's where the problems in the pandemic really lay, is that they didn't know it. If they knew it, it was surprising how much better things went in the remote learning world, because
Absolutely.
if they knew that. So I want that to be, if that's my number one thing, I want to be able to walk up to any educator in any building and go, tell me about that kid sitting right over there. And they can say, oh, well, that's Luis, and Luis has this going on. So I've been working with them on a different way to approach this. And so, and that only is able to happen, Jason, and based on what everything else that we've talked about, is that ability to figure out how to lessen the impact of the high stakes accountability with things that are still accountability measures, but they're more suited to that community and what that community wants.
I think that's a beautiful vision. And as I think, as you all continue to progress down the road to creating a learner, dare I say, almost a human-centered system of learning, that the pillars to that are built on a learner's needs, interests, and goals. And the only way to have a clear sense of that is to know the learner as a human being.
Right.
So I thank you for sharing that. And then the other question I'm curious to ask is that, with your experience in this space, in the innovation space, and with your more recent learnings, so really thinking about the emerging narrative for the agency, thinking about lessons learned from the vision and lessons learned from the pandemic. I mean, creating change anytime is tough. Creating deep change at a time where everything feels like it's built on sand and or is on fire is a whole nother deal.
Yeah.
But for learning communities that are interested in undertaking this type of deep change, what advice might you have for them?
I mentioned early on about our remote learning program and how more successful it was than other states, because a bunch of people who were already doing this thing.
So they have the context.
They have the context. So what I would say to you is those districts, which are the ones that are our L3s, our local laboratories of learning right now, we haven't had, it's interesting, we haven't had a single conversation of any length where anybody has been talking a bunch about, well, we can't do that because we're trying to get back on track.
Oh, thank goodness.
That's the difference. When I hear some folks that we're talking to about becoming an L3, they're like, well, I just don't think we have time because we're doing this and this to get ourselves. But when you talk to the leading districts in this work, they're already sort of back to their, they had an easier path back to normalcy, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
And others did, because before the pandemic hit, they were already doing a lot of this stuff. It's kind of, to me, it's like, Uber and Uber Eats didn't just show up when the pandemic hit. They were already here. They just got really accelerated because of the pandemic. Well, if you were doing the things that you needed to do to have the culture that I described in my vision before the pandemic, then your pandemic, yes, not the same at all. And I'm not saying that in any way, shape, or form, but to get back to where you were, and when you got back in person, and when you got back to some more normal types of learning environments, it didn't take you as much as it did others, because you were already thinking that way. You had designed your instruction during the pandemic based on a model that was in place in your district before the pandemic. You were already doing hybrid kinds of models of learning. You had kids on devices all over the place in the libraries and everywhere else. So yeah, I think that to me is, there are districts that are, but I think you have to ask yourself the question, and that's what we ask these folks who are considering it, is, do you think that, do you view this as a different or additional thing? Because coherence is the biggest part of this conversation, Jason. You have to see that what we're asking you to do in this United We Learn L3 work
Mhm.
is simply taking what you're already doing and making it better. It's
Yeah.
thinking about the next thing that you need to do, and then the next thing, and creating your future from what you're already doing, and the way you've lived your culture of your district for the years leading up to the pandemic and through it. That's,
That culture change, right? That's usually the hardest piece because
yeah,
you're describing a culture of innovation that embraces change so that they were flexible, nimble enough, and had the mindset there that when you were caught with disruption, you continue with that trajectory of change rather than falling into the very human trap of saying, I just want to go back to how things were pre-pandemic, which, arguably didn't work well for hardly anybody, right? So, it's that culture change, I think, to me, it is, and from our lens as futurists, that is the deepest change.
and it's the
Everything.
hardest, yeah, it's the hardest thing for state agencies, for local districts, and for schools, because what's the variable that inevitably causes that culture conversation to radically shift quickly? And that is, 3 years down the road, you hire a new principal, you hire a
Yep.
new superintendent, you get appointed a new state chief because the administration changed.
Hmm.
So it's so difficult to maintain, and we've seen that in our innovation zone program, our districts of innovation, where we've seen a superintendent that just went gung-ho in the beginning, and they jumped into the innovation zone, and they went crazy for 2 or 3 years. Then that superintendent moved on to a different district. I can't find that district anymore in any of our innovation work because the new person wanted to do things very traditionally.
Hmm.
So that is a difficult thing. I feel fortunate in Kentucky because we have a structure in the way our leadership is done, where we have a state board that's appointed by the governor, but it's got a lot of different layers on it that keep it's as nonpartisan as it could possibly be, because it has to have so many of both parties on the state board, and a whole lot of different diversity related factors, so that that state board doesn't shift as often as I know some states that have state boards have to do. And it also gives us a little barrier between gubernatorial shifts, and allows us to keep going in a particular path. We've had more situations where our commissioner has left on their own than because there was a new administration. So they've moved on to something else. So um,
So you can stay the course, right? You can
a little
avoid.
bit a little bit better. And if you have, and I'll just say this real quickly, if you have good, um, I mean, intermediary type of support, if you have good structures in your state, if you have an organization that supports the work that you do, like in Colorado, the Colorado Education Initiative, or other states that have that independent. I love that. I love having that. We unfortunately don't have that in Kentucky right now, which we're working on. We're actually trying to get that started as soon as we can, um, because that helps with the continuity thing too. Because if you
Hmm.
can give some of that work to an intermediary that's nonpartisan, then you got a good shot of it going past some kind of a administrative change. So anyway.
That's terrific.